All right, greetings, Demon cohort friends, and anyone else watching this. I'm excited for your upcoming trip to Israel, and as you know, I'm not going to be joining you. I've been 5 times in the last 5 years, and I'm excited that you guys get to go and experience this trip. So I know that you are going to be putting together some devotionals for the trip. So I thought my contribution, instead of doing a devotional on the trip, would be to put together a little bit of an introduction video that's going to help orient you for the trip. I've led a number of these trips over the years, and I've found that the more people understand about the history of Israel and the land that they're going to, the better their experience is. So you're going to be seeing lots of ancient stones in Israel, but you'll be seeing living stones as well, and you'll be meeting people, and it's good to know a little bit of their story. And so what I'm going to do here is I've taken a course that I've prepared for others, and I've sort of tailored it for you, trying to leave out some of the stuff that I know all you smart people already know, and trying to keep some of the stuff that's going to help give you an understanding of Israel. So I'm going to give you a short history of the modern state of Israel and a few things about the lay of the land, so that as you're traveling through the country, you'll have a better idea of what it is you're seeing out the bus window. So I'm going to try to keep this short. I know we're all busy folks, but yeah, I'm going to go through this and hope it's going to be helpful for you on your trip. Okay, so here we go. Some quick facts about Israel. Created May 14th, 1948, so it's just over 70 years old. Population of 9 million people. Approximately 8,500 square miles. So by comparison, the state of New Jersey is 8,700 square miles. So it's a tiny country, and you'll get a sense of how small it is once you're there. In terms of people groups, 75% Jewish, 20% Arab, and 5% other. And we'll see that religiously it corresponds to the people groups: 75% Jewish, 18% Muslim, 2% Christian, and I'll talk a little bit more later on about Christians in Israel, and then 2% Druze. Don't confuse the Druze with the Jews. It's entirely different. They're a bit of an offshoot of Islam, and 3% other. So as you can see, it's a very religious country. Almost everybody is religious in one way or another. Languages: Hebrew is the official language of Israel. Arabic and English are spoken as well. I'd encourage you to learn a few Hebrew and Arabic phrases just so you can converse with your bus driver and your guide in their own tongue. It's a good way to start. All right, I'm not going to go through the entire history of Israel, but just a little bit, just a brief overview. The Davidic kingdom of 1000 BC, then the Assyrians came on and took the land. After that was the Babylonians, followed by the Persians, and then the Greeks, and then the Maccabees had control over the land for a little while, till the Romans came along. We have the Byzantine era. You'll be hearing lots about Byzantine as you travel. As a time frame in terms of buildings, you'll find lots of churches that are Byzantine churches. Persians, Arabs come in 638, Fatimids, the Turks come in 1070s, then the Crusaders take it back and lose it to Saladin, the Mamluks, the Ottoman Empire in 1517, British Mandate 1917, and the State of Israel in 1948. If you want to dig deeper into that, feel free, but we won't do that here. So what's in a name? I've found that when I'm traveling, whether it's Chicago or anywhere else, people can be sensitive about calling particular areas by the proper names. So it's wise. Don't ask a Jew if they've lived in Palestine their whole life. Don't ask a Palestinian what part of Israel they live in. Different people groups are going to have different languages and different narrative for the land. Jews are going to call it Israel. Palestinians are going to call it Palestine. If you're not sure, the Holy Land is a good, safe way to refer to the land. But just be aware of that and be sensitive to the language that you use. Okay, so just a brief introduction to geography. We're not going to do a whole geography lesson here, but just a little bit about the lay of the land. Gaza in the southwest corner of Israel. We'll talk about that a little bit yet. The Sea of Galilee in the north, where Jesus' ministry was centered. We've got the Dead Sea in the south, on the edge of the Negev desert, and Jerusalem in the middle of it all. Okay, so here is a very brief history of the modern state of Israel. We can go back to the Ottoman Empire 500 years ago, who had the land until World War I. But before that, in 1896, Theodor Herzl, who was a Jewish journalist living in Austria-Hungary, published Der Judenstaat, which was the state of the Jews in English, which he asserted that the only solution to the Jewish question in Europe, the only solution for rising anti-Semitism, was for the Jews to have a state of their own. And so political Zionism traces its roots, the state of Israel traces its roots back to Theodor Herzl. So he's a name you should know. You'll see statues and monuments to Herzl throughout the land. In 1917, so after the British conquered the land of Palestine and took it from the Ottoman Empire in the middle of World War I, we have the Balfour Declaration. So Arthur Balfour was the Foreign Secretary for the British government and issued a statement on behalf of the British government regarding the future of the land of Palestine. So this is what the Balfour Declaration says. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. So this was middle of World War I, and this was the statement on behalf of the British government of their intention to establish a Jewish state. So from 1917 until 1948, we have what's called the British Mandate, and this is when the British controlled the land of Palestine. So here is a map of what the British Mandate looks like. Essentially, this is what is modern Israel right here, and what's called the Transjordan here is the modern country of Jordan. And so the British Mandate covered both of those areas until the establishment of Jordan as a country and Israel as a country as well. So we fast forward to World War II, and we have 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust. This is obviously a crucial and critical part of Jewish history, and it plays a critical role in the establishment of Israel as a state as well. I'm hoping on your trip you'll be visiting Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. But obviously this event spurred on Jewish emigration out of Europe and immigration into the land of Palestine. So in 1947, a couple years after World War II, the UN put forth Resolution 181, which was a partition plan on how they wanted to divide up the land in Palestine between Arabs and Jews. So this is the UN partition plan of 1947. The light color is an intent to be a Jewish state. The gray would be an Arab state, and Jerusalem would be an international state. And so it looks fairly evenly split up. What you'll notice, though, if you know about Israel, is that the southern half of Israel is the Negev desert. So the Jewish people were given the desert. The Arabs would be given most of the more fertile land of the north. Jewish people, Israel's accepted this, and the Arab party did not accept this. And so this was the plan, but this land separation never happened. So on May 14th, 1948, the day before the British Mandate was set to expire, Israel declared its independence, and this is the birth of the modern state of Israel. The very next day, on May 15th, the surrounding Arab countries attacked the one-day-old country of Israel. This Arab-Israeli War of 1948 is known by a couple different names. So Jewish people are going to call it the War of Independence, and the Palestinian people are going to call it the Nakba, which is Arabic for catastrophe, because in many ways for Palestinian people, this war was a catastrophe for them. So Egypt and Jordan and Syria were the three countries that attacked Israel. There was about 10 months of fighting with various truces going on in between. Throughout that time, about 700,000 Palestinians were expelled from their home. Some fled for their safety, others were forced out at gunpoint. So what it effectively did was empty a number of Palestinian villages and cities throughout Palestine. In the following 3 years, 700,000 Jews immigrated into Palestine, mostly from Europe. They were refugees fleeing the aftermath of the Holocaust. They came across empty Palestinian homes and were told to pick a home, and that will be your home. So in effect, one group of refugees, sorry, that's cut off there, one group of refugees created another. And that's very much part of the story of the formation of Israel. So after the War of Independence, or the Nakba, in 1949, this is what the land looked like. Egypt controlled Gaza, and Jordan controlled the West Bank, and the rest was controlled by Israel. Fast forward to 1967, and we have the Six-Day War. So leading up to the Six-Day War, there were rising tensions again with Israelis and their neighbors, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and Iraq. Egypt mobilized its forces along the border, ready to attack Israel. So they had lined their forces up along the northern border of Egypt, and the Israeli Air Force preemptively struck Egypt and caught them by surprise and effectively wiped out most of their air force. There were simultaneous ground attacks in Gaza and in the Sinai, and it was a war that only lasted 6 days, hence the name, the Six-Day War, and it was a massive victory for Israel. Okay, so here's what Israel looks like before and after the Six-Day War of 67. So on June 5th, the day before the war, this is what Israel looked like, controlling the light-colored area. And 6 days later, after the war, this is what Israel looked like. So you'll see in the north, Israel won the Golan Heights from Syria, they won the West Bank from Jordan, and they won the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt. So Israel would hang on to that Sinai Peninsula for another 12 years. There was a lot of fighting in those 12 years over that land. Eventually, Israel made a peace deal with Egypt and gave them back the Sinai Peninsula in exchange for peace. And Israel and Egypt have peace to this day. In the north, the Golan Heights, Israel still hangs on to that, and that's disputed. And the West Bank, eventually they made a peace deal with Jordan as well over that land, and so they have peace with Jordan as well. So a look here at present-day Israel and some of the disputed territories. Gaza in the south, Israel has withdrawn entirely from Gaza as of 2005, although they can enter militarily if they choose. In the north, the Golan Heights are still disputed. Israel has had that since 1967, and they're not going to let go of it anytime soon. And the West Bank obviously is the central focus of disputed territories when we're talking about Israel on the international scene and settlements and all that sort of stuff, and we'll talk about West Bank in detail a bit as well. So Palestinian perspective on their loss of the land. If you look at the 1947 UN partition plan, they were supposed to, the Arabs, Palestinians were supposed to have 48% of historic Palestine. After 1967, they ended up with about 22% of historic Palestine, and today only 12% of Palestine is in Arab hands, or 12% of Israel, depending on how you want to talk about it. A little bit about how the West Bank is broken up, and it's important for you as you're driving through West Bank and visiting places like Jericho and Bethlehem to understand the different areas that you are in. So you'll see there are 3 areas. There's Area A, and these are places like Jericho and Bethlehem, Hebron in the south. These have full Palestinian control, civil and security. So they are doing their own schools, their own infrastructure, their own hospitals, and they're entirely their own security, their own police force as well. Area B is a mix, and so this is the green area. This is Palestinian civil control, but Israeli security. And so the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, controls who goes in and out of those areas of Area B. And Area C is full Israeli control, which you see actually is at least half of what the West Bank is. And so from a Palestinian perspective, it looks to them like their land is being slowly eaten up by Israel. The Israeli perspective is, this is Judea and Samaria. This has been our land for 3,000 years, and we are taking what is ours. And so obviously there are two very differing and conflicting perspectives on the land. So back to the brief history of Israel. A couple of important events would be the Intifadas. So the first Intifada was 1987 to 1991. Intifada is an Arabic word which means an uprising. So this was an uprising against Israel's occupation of West Bank and Gaza. It left 1,200 Palestinians dead and 160 Israelis. A second Intifada happened in the early 2000s for 5 years. This was more violent, more extended, 3,000 Palestinians and 1,000 Israelis killed in this fighting. So, sorry, this is cut off again, but US-led peace talks have come and gone over the years with limited success. And in 2002, the construction of the security wall began. So let's have a look at the wall. You'll be seeing it a fair bit as you drive through the land. So here's the wall in the Jerusalem-Bethlehem area. A lot of it is this 18-meter high concrete structure. Some of it is still being built, as you can see by the top right picture. And this is not a wall that goes around the West Bank. It snakes its way through the West Bank wherever Israel decides to put it. And so you can see it doesn't go in a straight line anywhere, and it creates a lot of problems for Palestinian people, and we'll talk about that in a minute. One of the purposes of the wall, or the purpose of the wall, at least according to Israel, is to stop things like this happening. Suicide bombers coming in to Israeli cities and towns and causing massive destruction. And so in some senses, the wall has worked. Violence has been greatly mitigated thanks to the security wall, but occasional attacks still do happen. From a security or a safety standpoint, you're safe in Israel. Statistically, you're safer in Israel than you are in Chicago. Not to pick on Chicago, but that's the country that, or the city that always comes up. The chances of you experiencing any violence in Israel is slim to none. Tourists simply aren't the target of any terror attacks anymore. And the wall has for a large part worked, and a lot less of this happens now than it used to. However, the wall has other effects. So the wall goes where Israel wants the wall to go. So a farmer may have a house on one side of the wall and an olive grove on the other side of the wall. And so if he wants to go and pick olives, it means standing in line for many hours to get across to the other side to be able to go pick his crop if someone on the other side hasn't taken it already. I remember last year talking with our bus driver in Jerusalem, his wife, they're Palestinians, and they wanted to go visit some friends who were about a half-hour drive away. It took all day, over 8 hours, and they had 20 minutes of visiting time in there. The rest of the time was standing in lines like this, trying to get through the security barrier. So the wall makes life for Palestinians in Israel very difficult. Obviously, most Palestinians are not terrorists and don't have that sort of mindset, but the wall affects them nonetheless. Israel today continues to build settlements in the West Bank. This is the target of international criticism. So you're looking at here at a settlement. Settlements are essentially cities in the West Bank, built on what was supposed to be Arab land. And so this is looking at a settlement called Efrat, which I've visited many times. These cities are new and modern. They have beautiful schools and synagogues, hospitals. They have their own private highways that only Israelis can travel on to get to these settlements. And these settlements are the focus of a lot of worldwide criticism of Israel today. Israel is also often unfairly singled out by the United Nations and European community. Israel was the only country recently singled out by the United Nations as a country who would oppress women's rights. Their neighbors are Saudi Arabia, countries like this where women are severely oppressed, yet United Nations chose only to single out Israel as a violator of women's rights. So things like that, the United Nations has in effect declared that Israel has no historical connection to the Temple Mount. So things like that, Israel is criticized rightly sometimes and unrightly sometimes as well. And again, I'm going to try to toe the line here and not get overly political or theological in talking about Israel. But they are the center of a lot of controversy, obviously. Where do we stand as Christians? There are two extremes for Christians. So here, just as an example, we have the Christians United for Israel. Because I am a Christian, I stand with Israel. And obviously lots of evangelicals fall into this camp, lots of conservatives. We could talk about dispensationalist views and all that sort of stuff as well. But for many conservative evangelicals, to be Christian is to support Israel and to stand with Israel. Other Christians, however, side with the oppressed Palestinian people, using words like colonialism, apartheid, and dispossession. Siding with the oppressed and saying that Israel needs to step up and give rights to Palestinian people, whether they be Christian or Muslim. So there are definitely extremes on how Christians view the land, and non-Christians obviously as well, and you'll figure out where you stand on that spectrum. I want to say a little bit about Christians in Israel. They're less than 2% and they're declining. Christians have been in this land for 2,000 years. There has been a continual Christian presence in Israel, and it's close to disappearing. Christians are mostly Arabs, Palestinians, though there are a few Messianic Jews in Israel as well. They find themselves caught in the middle between radical Muslim and Jewish ideologies, neither of which they agree with. I've had many conversations with many of these people in Jericho and in Bethlehem, and it's tough for Christians living in Israel because they find themselves very much caught in the middle, and they're largely unsupported by Western Christians. Evangelicals in the United States and Canada largely want to support the Jewish people and their troubles, and our Christian brothers and sisters often are left in the lurch. And so I want to encourage you on your trip to find ways to connect and support our Christian brothers and sisters in Israel. So it might be visiting Bethlehem Bible College, which is an evangelical Bible college in Bethlehem. There's a wonderful woodworking co-op in Bethlehem that's owned by a number of Christian families. So I'd encourage you to find ways to support Christians in Israel. In the meantime, stay informed. Haaretz and the Jerusalem Post are a couple of Israeli newspapers that I follow on Facebook just to keep up with news and what's going on in the country. Just yesterday was the Israeli election, and I guess time will show whether Netanyahu stays in power or not. By the time you watch this, it's probably all solved. But I encourage you just to follow these feeds and stay informed with what's going on. And finally, we can pray for peace. There are lots of people in Israel who are working for peace. Most people, whether they are Muslim or Jewish or Christian, Palestinian, they do want peace in the land, and I'd encourage you to have conversations and find people who are working for peace. So I'll leave it there, and I hope this has been helpful. I hope it's been informative. If you have questions, I'm open to answer anything that I can, and looking forward for you guys to having a great trip in Israel. Take care.